Well, hello and welcome to this special episode of Impact Makers. Now, if you're listening to us in all those usual places, why not check out the video feeds? Because for this episode, Caitlin and I have been visualized. Yes, she's in the same studio as well, which is great because they usually try and keep us apart. Is that right, Caitlin?
That's right, because usually I'm based in New York, but we've really splashed out on the budget for this episode. Not only to bring me here, economy class, of course, if our CFO is listening, but also to have this lovely studio. And we even have our producer, Alex, here in studio to make sure that we don't break anything.
Very excited to be making this episode. You're both going to do amazing.
Well, that just raised the bar. Do you know, Caitlin, it's been 2 years since we recorded our first episode. That was the rise of store brands, where I gave you my verdict on Trader Joe's. It's an episode, I think, that still stands today. But if you are new to Impact Makers, you need to think of us as your product experience marketing podcast. So we hunt down those trends, ideas, and innovations that keep CPG brands ticking along nicely.
And we celebrate those products that go beyond liking, that feel a little bit more meaningful, that create lasting memories, that really tap into the emotional experiences that we have. So check out our recent episodes.
So it's been a fascinating ride lately. You take completely different categories and the same sort of story is emerging. And that story is that the consumer seems to be moving faster than brands and categories.
Do you think the industry is missing something deeper?
I think so. So let's take the dirt disruptors. So when we looked at the home care category and we found consumers increasingly turning to trigger sprays as a proxy for mindfulness. So after that show, I actually commissioned a poll because I wanted to kind of get an extra proof point for some of the things we were saying. And that poll told me that 70% of people across America and the UK find cleaning their home genuinely therapeutic and calming. And meanwhile, that category is still banging on about 99% germ kill. And then we took our tour of the beauty aisle and new beauty frontiers, and we found that consumers increasingly want resilience and emotional regulation from their daily routines. Rewind even further to alcohol, and whilst most of the talk is about economics and health trends, that's as the main reasons for dampening demand. I think it's got more to do with the way people are spending their time these days. Compared to 10 years ago, we are much more disconnected as a society. People's leisure pursuits are much more individualistic. And so that category needs to increasingly be designing for connection. I put out a blog about some of these thoughts. You can get the links to that in our socials, so search for us on LinkedIn or Instagram.
At Impact Makers Pod. Well, it's been said that change will never happen this slowly again, and they were right, because yet another change is about to turn marketing rules on their head, right? We know that we're on the precipice of millions of people beginning to trust their relationship with AI and put their shopping experiences in the hands of agents.
Yeah, this, of course, all part of the agentic era, 2 words that I'm going to get very sick and tired of saying, I'm sure, very quickly. I've only just got over the agility years. But I have got another poll for you. So we asked people around the world, so 7 leading economies, how likely they would be to delegate routine shopping to AI agents. And I can tell you that in the UK, 30% of people would be happy for AI to take the basket. That was 25% in America, 60% nearly in China.
Wow. We better find out what's going on by getting in touch with one of our Asia counterparts. That's Coco Wu. Hello, Coco. Where are you in the world today?
Hi, Caitlin. I'm actually in Taiwan right now. Very excited to join you.
Great. So tell us a bit more about why Chinese consumers are embracing the agentic era.
Absolutely. So in China, I think that the foundation are already in place for the AI shopping agents to take over a lot of routine purchasing. The big difference is really about the ecosystem integration. In the West, people switch between different apps, from messaging to payment to shopping to delivery to travel and to social content. But in China, many people really live inside a few super apps where shopping and payment and content really intertwine together. That market is so much easier for AI shopping to happen right now.
Could you give us a few more examples of these ecosystems, Coco?
Sure. We have platforms developed by big tech companies such as Doubao from ByteDance, Qianwen from Alibaba, and Yuanbao from Tencent. Right now, they are in a fierce battle to win consumers to onboard agentic shopping. And we have to recognize that AI shopping is also becoming much more mainstream and friendly to senior people. During the holiday, 130 million people used the AI for shopping for the first time, including near 4 million users aged 60 and above. So you might be wondering why so much can happen, right? Like within such a short period of time. I think this can only happen because China has this history of running those massive data based on big tech giant. They already know your routine, your preferences. For example, they know when you commute, where you travel to, what do you watch, what do you eat, what do you drink, and what do you put on your skin. So at the same time, AI is becoming so much more accurate in terms of predicting what you need. AI uses those habits to enable product find people model rather than people find the products. So it can completely outsource the shopping labor and do it without you paying attention.
Well, if you wanted to know what's coming, there it is right there. So we've seen CNBC in America report that Chinese companies are well beyond Western technology. And that's not only because of Western tech facing more fragmented data and stricter privacy policies. How are brands preparing over there, Coco?
Yeah, as you already understand, there's a lot of stakes for the brand, and I'm sure you will cover this much more with other guests. But I think one main thing for me is brand must exist as a readable data today so that AI can easily access such things like ingredients, supply chains and claims and brand ethics and etc. Because building those credible proof signals and owning a clear job to be done so that the agent can confidently pick you for specific outcome.
Well, thank you so much for joining us from beautiful Taiwan, Coco. We really appreciate it. While we have you, give us a teaser about our next episode.
You might be heard of the China magazine trend, which is about reflecting the growing global curiosity about Chinese youth culture. And it's not just about aesthetics, it's about the mindset underneath it. So next episode, we will be exploring this and the exciting cultural trends come from Asia and what it could mean for the world in general.
Thanks, Coco.
Well, we really look forward to that, don't we, Coco? That was Coco Wu, brand strategist with Huxley, who's after my job.
Well, that was quite sobering. Later, we'll be meeting Walter Pasquarelli, who is a leading expert in the field of AI and synthetic data, because this is clearly something that all brands need to be thinking about wherever they're based. Before AI takes the basket, let's round up the latest with a topic we've covered quite frequently throughout our tenure of impact makers, GLP-1s. Where are we at this week, Andrew?
Yeah, this week. Yeah, as I've said before, this is a live case study, isn't it? But we do know a lot more than we did, say, a few months back. So there is a big study out there published in the British Medical Journal. It was 9,500 people, 37 clinical studies, and that found that 65% of non-diabetic people that were taking GLP-1 medications quit within 12 months. And they cite cost, the side effects, even sensory deprivation as key reasons. We also know from other studies that within 2 years, most people regain most of the weight. So, wake up call. GLP-1s do not solve the obesity problem. They are a clinically impressive medical intervention. But meanwhile, in the real world, people are finding them intolerable, too expensive. They, I think, are simply a short-term hack for weight loss. And here's my provocation. I think GLP-1s are eventually going to run out of people. So based on another consumer poll, we've got an up-to-date picture of GLP-1's consideration and incident rates. So let's call out the UK, because that's where we are. So based on a poll of 1,500 people, we know that 4% of Brits are currently on GLP-1s. And that's pretty much what I'm seeing in other studies. From this, we also know that 6% of the population have been on their GLP-1 journey but quit within the last 12 months. So the number of people who have not yet taken GLP-1s but would consider it is 13% of the UK population. 77% of the population are either unaware or they will not take GLP-1s at all. So I guess, what happens when these 13% of people, which is significant because, changes in their consumption is significant, in a flatlining CPG environment that could cause categories to decline. But what happens when they have had their GLP-1 experience and quit? As I say, this is possibly not the big thing that it was meant to be. You remember plant-based meat alternatives, Caitlin, another health intervention that eventually ran out of steam.
And it's a piercing thought, Andrew, and we know this story is still unfolding. There's new bits of information that are coming out every day. And we know, too, that each month we learn a little bit more how new medications are coming out. They're going to be cheaper, like the pill, for example. We're also seeing that there's going to be potentially less side effects. But what we're not sure of and what we don't know is if the people who have discontinued taking these medications will actually come back around to take them a second time.
Yeah. I think, they are the ultimate biohack, aren't they? And hacks is something that is in right now. And interestingly, I think GLP-1s are kind of normalizing these sort of injectables. And yeah, you're reading some pretty crazy things at the moment about people injecting peptides, for example.
Right.
And what concerns me, of course, is that a lot of these are sourced on the grey market.
And we hear even more, too, about things like microdosing, different ways that consumers are actually taking these products potentially differently from how they were originally intended. While the incidence of GLP-1s might be small, their effect on innovation has obviously been much more significant and continues to trend in a growing direction.
Absolutely.
It's really starting to expose products that are considered quite nutritionally weak. And we see that the importance for nutrition density, including vitamins and fiber enrichment, all of those good little extra beneficial bits, is becoming just as important as volume. So we've brought together a number of different products that are available here in the UK. Thanks for curating these. Some of these it's my first interaction point with, so nice to see. We've got a set here from Marks & Spencer, which is obviously a UK-based brand. So this is my first interaction with the M&S Nutrient Dense range.
What do you think?
It's interesting to see these products coming to life. I mean, I know from looking into these products that it's a range that has about 20 products available and prioritizes things like protein, fiber, vitamins, and minerals to really deliver on a product that is providing some of that nutrient density and diversity.
Yeah. And, incidentally, from our health episode, we know that these nutrition triggers are more appealing than plant-based,
right?
As a claim,
which was an extremely salient claim just a few years ago. But now we're seeing it fading a little bit more into the background compared to this nutrition density element.
These are the response, aren't they? Because if you're on GLP-1s, the big concern is because you're eating a lot less, that you're not getting the nutrition, but you don't have an appetite. So it's about compacted solutions with higher nutritional value.
Right. And even though we know that these products work well to support a GLP-1 user, they also don't exclusively mention that on the packaging, right? Because they want to make sure that they still appeal to a wider consumer set. So it's not only for those on GLP-1s, but it does certainly help them along their journey. Now, we've seen PepsiCo enter the space as well with Sun Bites, which are affectionately known in the US as Sun Chips, and they've been around for quite a bit longer. But here, PepsiCo prioritizes the claim of additional fiber, which really helps to kind of shift the narrative of snacking from something that's maybe more intentionally healthy to something more slightly healthful, perhaps.
Yeah, it's It's an attack on mindless munching, isn't it? There is some more intention there, and we were always talking about intention on this podcast.
That's right. Definitely for the more intentional consumer.
Yeah. But it's making its way into mainstream products now.
And we see as well, unsurprisingly, dairy being a big contender in this space as well. Consumers are really hoping for something that they can have that high level of protein, and something like yogurt is a natural solution for this. We've got higher protein. It can be easily augmented with additional fiber or other beneficial ingredients. And yogurt as well offers somewhat of a permissible indulgence for our consumers, something that's creamy and rich and doesn't cause them to have to sacrifice convenience or enjoyment as they look for more of these beneficial elements.
Yeah. And, looking at these products, you get the feeling that this is the jolt that CPG brands needed to actually respond to all of the concerns around ultra-processed foods. So, all of these, you could argue, are much more positively processed.
Absolutely. And GLP-1s have definitely accelerated that change as well.
Without doubt.
For the brands that we see here. So if we're talking about results that we've seen at MMR, our sensory teams have previously explored and suspected that potentially these medications can dull your sensory experience and kind of reduce the intensity with which you experience different flavors and different tastes. But what we're learning now is that isn't always the case.
Okay.
So sometimes we're finding consumers actually experience more intensity and sensitivity to things like saltiness and sweetness and umami. While on the other side of the coin, we see that some textures are becoming nearly unbearable for consumers. So it's a very interesting dynamic to explore, where we thought potentially alongside this reduction of cravings was a stunting in sensory experience. There's actually much more to the story than we thought.
Dr. Paulina Lang is head of behavioural science with the MMR Group. She also happens to be the Impact Makers behavioural science correspondent. Now, Paulina, nice to have you on the pod. In this live case study, what could you confidently say to advise brands as of now?
So the good news is that we can say more and with a lot more confidence because there's a lot more evidence that's coming out. Having said that, there are still significant gaps in what we know, especially when it comes to long-term effects and also what happens after people stop.
What stands out the most in your research?
I think first and foremost, it's the disappearance of the food noise, a phrase that I'm sure everyone's heard of. By
buzzwords.
Now. Exactly. And it is also something that we're seeing in social listening. So we recently did an exercise at MMR where we looked at what people are talking about online, and 84% of conversations about GLP-1s mention reduced cravings. Because food noise is all about reduced thoughts about food and cravings, which are often experienced as quite intrusive by people. And when it comes to reduced appetite, we're also seeing evidence that now quantifies how much that appetite is reduced. For example, there was a recent study done at the University of Leeds, which showed that there was a 24% reduction in daily calorie intake, which is obviously the whole point. So great news for people on the medication. But what's also important to mention is that cravings don't necessarily disappear completely. This is something that's quite pronounced, especially early on in the journey where people are more likely to experience side effects and just find their way around the medication. And even then, the snacks, the comfort foods still need to feel more permissible to earn their space in people's baskets and repertoires.
Right. Now, this is something that we've heard quite frequently as we've talked to consumers who are using GLP-1s or even coming off of them as well, is that it's fundamentally changed their relationship with food.
Yes, most definitely. And I think it's worth reflecting on everyone's relationship with food and the role of food, because it's so central to many people, many cultures. It's such an important source of comfort, of social connection, emotional regulation. We build whole routines and identities around food. So it is really, really central. And given that it's such a big source of joy, there have been questions around, well, what happens when that joy disappears? I think what we're hearing from consumers quite clearly is that they're not naive to that. It is something that they accept as a trade-off for what is essentially a pretty reliable promise of weight loss.
So those relationships change not just practically, but emotionally when people are on these medications, right?
Yes, definitely. And I think what we're seeing is that people are a lot more intentional. And I know it's a word that we've used a lot on this podcast.
Possibly.
And we've referred a lot to the more intentional consumer. If I remember correctly, intentional was your word of the year for 2025, right? So the current GLP-1s users are some of the most intentional shoppers out there. And this is very much helped by the disappearance of food noise. So suddenly they have a lot more mental space and increased executive control, which is how psychologists would describe it. It's just that space and ability to plan ahead, to think through purchases, what goes in the basket, what goes on plates. So with hunger out of the equation and not steering decisions anymore, we're seeing people take a lot more informed and calculated decisions and just a different approach to diet and routines. And this goes beyond just reducing portion sizes. So yes, people do eat overall less, as we've already mentioned, and they also snack less. But what we're also seeing is that people pay a lot more attention to hydration. They also tend to stick to quite safe and easy to digest foods, especially early on in the journey when they're more likely to be experiencing side effects. They choose foods that provide energy because a lot of them will be experiencing sluggishness and lack of energy as they're consuming less food overall. They will be paying attention to protein, fiber, and also resisting those cravings that may sometimes still strike.
We know a lot, don't we, about the side effects, as you just mentioned, and there's a lot of research about what happens when people are on the medications. But what happens when the medications stop? This seems to be far less understood, right?
Yes, definitely. So what we do know is that, unfortunately, for a lot of people, the changes and the effect don't persist. So the appetite and the food noise return pretty quickly after people stop. And again, this is something that consumers are very much aware of. And we're hearing from consumers who are considering coming off medication or preparing themselves about them being quite worried and anxious about what's going to happen. There's some research suggesting that slowly tapering off, as well as receiving lifestyle support, so support around changing long-term habits, may help to a degree, but we still need a bit more research to be able to recommend to people what to do with confidence. And I think, to me, the main question around behavior change is what happens when you remove that pharmacological scaffolding that is so helpful to people. So what happens when you remove it to behavior change? And I believe we have a few videos where we can hear directly from consumers who have stopped taking the medication.
So firstly, there was a lot of bad press coming about of it in the news, a lot of bad kind of reactions, and the long-term health implications weren't particularly clear. So I worried about the long-term health implications of taking GLP-1 or medication.
The reason why I decided to stop taking GLP-1 medications was because I was starting to get disgusting and terrible symptoms. I was starting to feel very sick. I was starting to get very nauseous, very lightheaded.
I had pretty bad side effects with like gastrointestinal issues while I was on the medication. It did get better as I went along and got into a maintenance phase, but it was still to the point where the first day that I would take the medication, I would not be able to eat very much food at all, or else I would risk having like severe stomach pain, nausea, and vomiting. And so I would have like a protein shake on the first day, and then that would be about it.
Me and my husband just can't afford it right now, so That's the reason that I got off of the GLP-1 medication.
I felt really happy and elevated during that time, knowing that I've had like control of my appetite and had control of like how my weight was sort of going down and decreasing and working towards being healthier, being more active.
Towards the end of my journey, I started to see it in a different light, that like emotionally, like I'd taken control of the situation, I'd done something about it, and obviously physically, like I've seen a huge difference.
So some really personal and emotional testimonies there. This ultimately begs the question for us, Paulina, what do brands have to do?
What we're seeing currently from brands is that they're very much focusing on current GLP-1s users, and you've shown some great examples of such products. But as Andrew mentioned earlier, we're going to see a growing number of former GLP-1s users, and of course, those people will be navigating the return of appetite. And I'm sure they will want to remain in control. They will want to protect the weight loss that they worked so hard on achieving. And they will want to protect that new identity that I'm sure will come with, all the progress that they've experienced. But I think what it means is that brands will have a great opportunity to be a source of support for people coming off the medication. It will be quite a challenging stage for people, as they're now, again, experiencing cravings, but now they will have the knowledge and the experience that they've gained through using the medication. So I think there's a chance for brands to support the long-term behavior change, help make informed choices, provide choice architecture that actually enables healthy choices without feeling restrictive or feeling guilt.
And it will be interesting to see as well if there are any reverberations beyond the physiological. We know that cravings may come back, but as people have increased confidence, does that mean that they're engaging more with the beauty space? Are they taking better care of themselves more holistically, engaging in different lifestyle changes? So I think it can go far beyond just food and beverage in terms of a broader impact. So a live case study, of course, that we're going to be checking in on more continually. Thank you so much, Paulina. Please hang around for our main discussion.
And that discussion, of course, is about when AI takes the basket, not just in China, but globally. To help, we've invited some expert human intelligence into the studio. Walter Pasquarelli. He is a global recognized writer, speaker, and expert on AI strategy and synthetic reality. He has advised Fortune 100 companies, world leaders, even royalty, on the impact of generative technologies, and he has led AI thought leadership and advisory programs with the Economist Group. And I could go on. Walter, it is fantastic to have you on Impact Makers podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Good to be back. I really enjoyed the conversation that you've just had until now. In
this part of the podcast, we're going to explore what happens when generative engine optimization, GEO, takes over from SEO. We're going to look at how brands should respond in order to become AI's default choice. And we will speculate on what all of this means for human shopping. 2 words that I didn't think I would say, Caitlin. Now, Walter, I want to start actually by getting your reflections on an article I know you've read. So it was by Matt Schumer, called Something Big is Coming. If you haven't read this article, I suggest you search for it. So that's Matt Schumer, Something Big is Coming. Now, Matt, he has spent the last 5 or 6 years creating this AI startup. And his essay is basically his latest reflections on AI's cadence and increasing capabilities. He says that the latest AI models, as we record this, ChatGPT 5.3 Codex, Anthropic, their Opus 4.6, are seismically better than what's gone before. He says that they're better at everything simultaneously. They appear to have judgment, quote, an inexplicable sense of knowing what the right calls are. And of course, they're even writing the next, even more impressive versions of themselves. And, you know, in the essay, Matt is left wondering where he fits in. Walter, what is left for humanity to do?
The first thing to understand is a bit the trajectory that these tools and these technologies have been taking over the past years. Obviously, the conversation around artificial intelligence isn't really new. I mean, it started, I think, in the 1950s, so really 70, 80 years ago almost. But obviously, the step change has come in late 2022, and I think we spoke last time in late 2023, so a year after the publication of the language models that feel a lot more intuitive.
Yeah.
Because they're essentially converging all this data and can generate outputs. Now, over the past years, really since we spoke last time, there's been a few things that have happened. Number one has been the increase in reasoning ability. So really the ability to not just predict the next word in the string, as models typically do, but weighing out the various kinds of options and really thinking this is a more nuanced essential output. The other trajectory has been with AI tools becoming more interactive. And that is something that relates to a functionality called memory. So it's essentially all the inputs that I provide into the chat that are able to essentially tailor more and more the responses that I want to have based on my preferences, my desires, my writing style, etc., etc. Now, where do we fit in all of this? There have been numerous forecasts made, and some forecasts have been going back and forth. I think the most famous one is from the World Economic Forum. I think first in 2020, they said AI will create more jobs than it will take away. Then I think 2 years later, after language models, they made a very pessimistic prediction. Then 2 years later, they made then another more optimistic prediction. Now they're basically just making scenarios because it's literally impossible to predict. Is it going to be white-collar jobs? Is it going to be entry-level jobs? Is it going to be someone else? But perhaps if I can share an anecdote or maybe a piece of wisdom from one of my favorite creators. There's a gentleman called Rick Rubin. He's a music producer. Most people haven't heard his name, but I've heard his work. So he produced the album from Adele. He produced Metallica's Black album. He produced All Star by Smash Mouth. He's producing basically every single hit song we like to dance to, we like to listen, we like to cry to, etc., etc. In an interview with Anderson Cooper, he's been asked, what are your technical abilities? And I have none. He's like, do you write any music? No. Do you play an instrument? No. So the question is, what do you get paid for? And his answer is, I get paid for the confidence that I have in my taste and my ability to express it. How does this relate to AI?
Yeah.
Across all of the evidence that we see across several industries, that is sales and marketing, finance, material scientists, even creative industries, when people used an AI tool, the people who were already top performers increased their productivity by something like between 30 and 40%. Average performers barely increased any their performance at all, which was usually between 2 and 6%. So what this means is that our ability to not only, quote unquote, survive in the AI age, but become a top 10 performer, a top 1 performer, is our ability to curate and to discern outputs and to understand what is signal among the noise. You can now have infinite outputs from AI. The ones who are able to select the right one are the guys who are going to thrive.
So let's get into the vortex of our conversation today, our key topic, when AI metaphorically takes the basket. Behind our playful title, there is a more significant trend occurring. It's a big shift, one that's most important for big CPG, of course. Going back to our poll, we know that about a third of Americans and Brits think that they're comfortable completely handing over their shopping experience to AI agents. That's if they can make the final choice, of course. Interestingly, we see that only 3% of consumers are actually willing to give over the experience completely. What do you make of that result, Walter?
I'm not surprised by it. I think in general, the delegation of task and the trust that people increasingly ascribe to language models, and I'm very conscious here not to say technology itself, but to language model, is something that is broadly in line with all of the evidence that we're seeing today. And for example, in my own research, we found that a large proportion, I think it was something like 60% of British and American people have already asked an AI for health advice. A similar number as well for questions about their relationship, and I think between 60 to 65% about financial advice as well. So if people are willing to outsource or at least get the advice from these kinds of tools on areas like that, then it fits into the picture very neatly. Now, one question is, of course, what is shopping? Are we talking here about, say, the groceries that maybe I have to buy every single day, like maybe some bread, some essential items, or are we looking at maybe things that are perhaps a little bit more emotional for me? And I think this is really the key distinction and the key difference that I would make. We're seeing right now really a usage of AI tools that is essentially there to reduce friction in any areas of our lives, virtually every area, shopping especially. But because that reduces the friction, that takes away also like the space that we can then assign to doing things that potentially we feel more emotional about. Buying that particular item that maybe means a lot to us, maybe buying something that has been hand manufactured. That's like a huge industry that is also emerging because we have that connection with the human hand between essentially a similar species like us. So I would say, to sum it up, the reduction of friction is real. The reduction of friction will continue. And the more we trust these tools, and that's something that will happen increasingly as well with the maturity of these tools, the more that will establish itself. The more meaningful shopping, I think that's something that I think will be a very large space as well, growing over the next few years as well.
Give us some idea about how this idea of AI shopping will show up in our day-to-day lives. You know, will we see, for example, Tesco, Walmart offer an AI generative basket option? Give us some idea how it might actually work.
Yes, so there's essentially two trajectories that I think we can make some relatively credible hypotheses on that. One is the platform hypothesis. And the platform hypothesis is essentially something that relates to OpenAI's product strategy of ChatGPT. Now, their idea is that essentially they want to become the gateway to online commerce and the gateway to the internet. So essentially, they would provide almost like the platform that if you want to buy any product, they would essentially link the various kinds of businesses, the various kinds of stores that you could then buy something. They would get a small percentage or commission of that, and they're essentially able to generate lots of new revenue. That's one. And the advantage of that one is that essentially, because these language models like GPT have all the data about us, it can match us very well with particular kinds of providers. We're seeing some of these already taking some shape. However, it's not an established concept per se. I think it would be far-fetched to say that this is now a mainstream use of AI in shopping. The other hypothesis is the decentralization hypothesis. And that would mean that, yes, we would have, in fact, stores such as Tesco, stores such as, for example, Sainsbury's, some grocery stores, maybe some clothing stores that might potentially put together a basket for us based on our past shopping, maybe based on our preferences that it can fetch from some other data that it gathers from us across the web. There's obviously like some consent mechanisms that will go in there. But in that way, we would essentially be able to, on the one hand, generate a basket that creates the items that we always buy. And on the other hand, potentially make those correlations with items that maybe we're not aware ourselves yet that we might actually like. So these are really the two trajectories that I think we can observe. Which one will succeed? We're not 100% sure yet.
So with AI taking the basket and making all of our selections, what becomes less important?
The one thing I think is going to happen, and that's sort of about what matters, is that I believe the vast volume of essentially shopping that we'll be doing online of things that are essentially not important to us, in brackets, in terms of emotional value, those are the ones where artificial intelligence lends itself to essentially be able to take the task off us, because we don't necessarily enjoy buying them. We might not dislike it either, but it's indifferent. But the ones that I think we will be that do carry emotional weight, those are the ones that I think an AI I would struggle to see replacing or taking over as easily.
Right. So as AI optimizes the more functional elements, humans lean into more of the emotional to kind of maintain that connection. How important in this case is brand distinctiveness? Because that's obviously something that's been top of mind for big CPG for a very long time. And presumably AI is able to, in making these recommendations to consumers, pick up on those products that make the most social noise.
So the brand distinctiveness, I think, matters essentially in two ways. On the one hand, there is really the importance of the GEO, the generative engine optimization, but that authenticity, that still the branding, the marketing around it, that makes me ultimately want to have a look at that, whether that's through a chatbot or whether that's through something that maybe someone might send to me. That is just as critical as it is now.
Yeah, so as well as distinctiveness, a lot of brands spend their time building their mental availability, and that is achieved, isn't it, by having your product on TV. It's about making sure it's salient all the time in the mind of the consumer. Does that matter?
Yeah, I would say with GEO, perhaps it matters even more, actually. And the reason for that is the way that these models are currently trained are on a number of sources. So the number one source of data that has sort of been the poster boy of generative AI inputs has been Reddit forums. And Reddit forums are, at least for now, are humans talking about something. What do you think of this product? Does anyone have this experience for that? Then you get the upvotes. And the upvotes means that there is essentially social support for that. So producing something that is essentially that people discuss on the open web is critical. The other part of the story then is the credibility. And the credibility that a brand might have is by, for example, having some credible sources, such as, for example, established media sources, discussing a particular product so that it gets referenced, it gets shared a lot, and it's essentially getting more impressions online. That's another way that brands can position themselves. But really, the issue here is human. It's not technical. It's not about whether I cannot optimize that necessarily, but I have to address what the consumer says. There's then potentially a final technical one, which is what consumer brands that want to optimize for generative engines do, which is writing the marketing copy in a particular kind of language that is easier for the model to fetch up. That's the only technical issue in this whole conversation, though. Everything else is still a social and human conversation.
It's interesting, Caitlin, isn't it? Because you recently have been talking on the podcast about how to get your product noticed by an influencer. It does beg the question about the importance of product experiences to get them talked about on Reddit. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I mean, something that we note quite frequently is this ability of sensory theater to really bring a product to life and drive that emotional connection with consumers to make them come back to the product again and again. And that's one of the ways that you get that social support is by that emotional resonance. So it's not just that something is enjoyed or potentially useful, but it's something that consumers are going to continue to come back to. And that human element is really what kind of drives other humans to try the same thing.
Yeah. And again, this is what we said at the very beginning about going beyond liking, isn't it? Because you're not necessarily going to get talked about on Reddit just for being liked. You've got to do something that's got a bit of wow to it, something a bit unexpected maybe. So I think, what we're saying here is that the sensory theatre actually becomes even more important in the agentic era.
That's right.
Yeah.
So Walter, can you talk us through SEO versus GEO and assuming that's going to be critical in the agentic era?
Yeah, so there is a few things that matter here. And I mean, with SEO, obviously, how do you get listed on page one on Google? That was always a question that everyone had for the past decade or so. As far as language models are concerned, there is two trends that are happening. On the one hand, there is the classic GEO, which is the one that if you ask, for example, who are the top 10 AI speakers in the world that I hope to be listed in there. And so how do we position ourselves so that the model absorbs me as a consumer brand and says, this is a good product. Have a look at this particular thing here without it necessarily coming across as an ad. That brings us to the second point, which is AI ads. And now, OpenAI always considered ads as essentially a quote-unquote last resort for essentially generating revenue, but now they have announced that there will be, as a matter of fact, including ads. That is going to be a lot more similar to SEO. So essentially, you can pay the firm, and essentially you work with the rankings, and it will be a much more similar mechanism from what we've seen in the past decades, with bits of GEO as well, because you don't have pages necessarily, but you essentially only have the rankings. GEO and SEO, we're going to see SEO still relevant via Google, at least for now. GEO will keep being relevant. AI ads will be probably a mix of those two.
But here's a thought. A couple of episodes ago, Caitlin and I, we speculated that the agentic era might lead to some quite unconventional M&A activity, mergers, acquisitions. So you might get, for example, Nestle. What happens if they buy Headspace? So Nestle, through its Nescafe, Nespresso, they have this association around cognitive clarity. I mean, it's what we do in the morning, right? If Nestle bought Headspace, they become the default productivity provider, don't they, in the eyes of AI? I mean, this is just a hypothetical example. There are many more where those came from. But do you think we're going to see that sort of activity as companies try and muscle in to be the default choice for consumer mood states or day parts, for example?
If we want to use AI tools for creating that emotional connection and fulfilling a particular kind of desire, then finding those linkages between, for example, Nestle and Headspace is obviously a fantastic strategy, totally uncharted territory as well.
So with AI handling the routine, what's left for humans?
Yeah, I am really convinced that with AI increasingly being used in shopping, the divergence between, on the one hand, the utility product and the emotional product is going to become so much larger, because we still want to shop. So it's not that people will all of a sudden say, oh yeah, we don't buy any products anymore. So AI has taken over shopping, so that's kind of it. But I think the real step change will be the utility-based products that would cost me maybe some kind of energy to go and buy them in a shop, and AI takes them over, does them for me, says like, are you happy with these products? And you approve, yes, I'm going to buy them. And on the other hand, the products that are more meaningful to us. And I think we see so much of this language as well when we see some of the more premium offerings, potentially things that we might buy less frequently, potentially because of price. So I saw like a male jewelry firm where the person advertising for them said something like, this is some meaningful jewel. And I was like, okay,
getting in early.
It's a ring.
Right.
But I believe we also talked about that, for example, now that we're facing sort of a world that is kind of more and more uncertain, what people want to have from the product is the feeling that it makes them more resilient. And even for myself, this year, and I usually tend to be pretty frugal with my shopping, the product that I spent the most in was a handmade leather notebook, which I could be like, of course I can buy that anywhere for $10. But the fact that it's this beautiful thing and it ages nicely, and but it's something that AI cannot take over, because I want to be able to tell myself a story. And that story, the people that can help me tell it to myself, is obviously the branding and the marketing, right?
Yeah. I think the New York Times reported just today that younger generations are taking on what they're calling grandma hobbies to step away from phones. So more of creating their own leatherback notebooks and cross-stitching and things like that. So it's definitely a relevant trend.
Absolutely.
And, what do you think, Paulina, in terms of if AI is taking out the routine, do you think that it's going to give more permission for those emotionally loaded decisions.
Yes, I think so. And I think it's also worthwhile bringing in the notion of control. So what I mean by that is that we're usually quite okay with delegating the kind of routine decisions and purchases. Yes, but as long as we maintain a sense or a level of control, and that will obviously increase the more meaningful the objects or the experiences are. So I think the winning platforms or systems will probably be the ones that will take care of the boring parts, like, I don't know, maybe calculating the best value or knowing which brand of pasta or bread we normally buy. But people will want to have some input to tweak, to approve, to give final sign-off to what actually arrives to our door. So I think that sense of control is something that we will try to keep, especially
as a human. Yeah.
Well, it's been really fascinating speaking with you today, Walter. Thank you so much for joining us here on Impact Makers. And historically, we've been surprised by consumers and how quickly they're willing to adapt to and adopt new technologies. So I wouldn't be surprised if you'll have some new people knocking on your door pretty soon.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me. Obviously, very happy for anyone to reach out to answer any questions. I'm always delighted and honored to be able to support people. Do not hesitate to reach out.
Tell us where we can find you.
I have a website, www.walterpasquarelli.com, which outlines my work. I also produce weekly written briefs that people can read, which are essentially long reads about a big topic that is happening right now. We also produce video essays that people can watch as well on YouTube. And it's the sort of the current important topics that we think are happening in the field of AI. So
Thank
fantastic.
you, Walter.
Thank you for having me. Good to be back.
One massive episode, 2 key topics.
It's going to be one heck of a year. One that I think is increasingly looking like it's going to be K-shaped.
K-shaped?
Yeah, I know. I don't want to overload the audience at this stage, but increasing talk out there that the economy is increasingly chasing the value end and the premium ends. Look out for that one.
Another massive blow to the mainstream middle.
You're not wrong. So plenty to think about in our next episode, where we're going to be replaced, not by AI, fortunately, but by our colleagues in Asia who will be reporting on what's coming down the line from the world's biggest growth engine, which is Asia. So listen out for the Asia takeover.
And we will be doing more YouTube drops. So we'll see you soon, and vice versa. Be sure in the meantime to push that like button below and to give us a follow. Add us to your favorites on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you may get